There are many aspects of sound we experience in everyday life that we take for granted. The reverberation of a room, or simple sounds changing by the slightest bit every time, are things we really take for granted in our everyday life. During my acoustics class at school, we learned about many of these properties that happen within the real world. And considering my interest and strong background in game audio, it got me wondering how many of these things carry over to the video game environment. In the field of acoustics, there's a concept known as resonant frequencies. This can most easily be described as the tendency of a space to resonate at a greater amplitude with some frequencies as opposed to others. Discovering what frequencies resonate in a room may sound extremely technical, like you might need some newfangled, high-tech, expensive device to figure things out. But in reality, all you need are the length, width, and height of a room, and some math skills. To find the dimensions of a room, just go down to your local hardware store, buy a tape measure, and find the length, width, and height of whatever room you want to measure. Then to find the resonant frequencies of that room, just use the room mode equation of the speed of sound divided by 2 times the square root of p over the length squared plus q over the width squared plus r over the height squared. Or if you're lazy, you could just search room mode calculator in Google and have it do the work for you. But while measuring the dimensions of a room you're in is pretty straightforward, measuring the dimensions of a room in a video game can be a bit tougher. You can't exactly put yourself in a video game and drag a tape measure around everywhere, though that would be kinda cool. Having said that, it's still entirely possible to find the dimensions of a room in a video game and test if its resonant frequencies work like a room with the same dimensions would in the real world. This is exactly what I did for the final project of my acoustics class, so let's break down the process. Now before you pull up your Steam library and open your favorite game to find the resonant frequencies of a room, just know that there are 3 important pieces of information you'll need from a game to be able to analyze it in the first place. For the purposes of my research, I used Portal 2, and I'll explain why as I go over all the things you'll need to analyze the resonant frequencies of a room in a video game. The first requirement is that you'll need a character with a documented height. This height will serve as a constant while you're measuring the rest of the dimensions of the room in comparison to your character. Some games have character bios that list their height, but for Portal I had to dig a bit deeper. In 2013, the developers of Portal 2, Valve, worked with the company 3A to make 6th scale models of the 2 co-op robot characters, Atlas and Peabody. According to the product specifications, Atlas and Peabody's models were 10.8 inches tall and 12 inches tall respectively. Since these models are 1/6 the size of the actual characters in game, we can multiply both of these values by 6 to find their actual heights. In doing so, we can determine that Atlas is 64.8 inches tall, while Peabody is 72 inches, making him a whopping 6 feet. Am I the only one surprised by this? I swear when I first saw these cute little guys, they couldn't have been more than 3.5 feet tall. Anyway, since Peabody is taller, I decided to use him as the constant for this experiment. The next requirement for a game to analyze is that it must have a sound that can serve as an impulse. Impulses are sounds that cover all or a large amount of frequencies in a short amount of time. Great examples of this are explosions, gunshots, and hand claps. Considering the amount of violent video games out there these days, finding a game with these sounds shouldn't really be that difficult. However, when Peabody dies in Portal 2, he explodes, providing the impulse needed for this research. The last piece of the puzzle is that you need a game in which you can access the impulse outside of the game. This is necessary so that you can compare the impulse with how it responds inside the virtual room. While many developers encrypt their game files, making it impossible for users to access, there are some games like Portal 2 where the files are readily available. Once I found a game that met all 3 of these requirements, it was time to start measuring. In the cooperative missions of Portal 2, the 3rd level of the first world had a rectangular room that was well suited for finding resonant frequencies. Since I already extracted the impulse from the game's files, it was just a matter of recording its response in the game itself. To minimize excess noise, I used Audacity to record the direct output from the game of Peabody exploding. Sorry, Peabody. After the impulse was recorded, I measured Peabody's on-screen height relative to each dimension of the room. I actually took these on-screen measurements by holding a tape measure up to my computer monitor, and yes, it looked as ridiculous as that sounds. Since I already established that Peabody was 72 inches tall, I was able to use this to establish a scale for the height, length, and width of the room. Once I crunched the numbers, I found that the room Peabody was standing in was 5.03 meters tall by 6.17 meters wide by 12.34 meters long. Then by using the lazy method I mentioned earlier of googling room mode calculator, I plugged in these dimensions and got a whole list of frequencies that would resonate in a room of this size. For the purposes of this video, I'll spare you the long list, but if you're interested, you can find a document in the description below. Now that I knew what frequencies should resonate in a room with these dimensions, it was time to find out if Portal 2 actually accounted for it. By using the plot spectrum function in our old friend Audacity, I was able to find out the frequency values of the impulse and its response in-game. While examining the difference between the impulse and its response, there was a 2 to 6 decibel boost in at least half of the resonant frequencies. This would give the initial impression that Portal 2 actually accounts for resonant frequencies, but that's not the case. Upon further inspection, many of the frequencies that neighbored the resonant ones received similar boosts in volume. Because this volume boost occurs across the board, it seems that Portal 2 isn't treating the resonant frequencies any different than the others. The most reasonable explanation for this change in volume is just that I had my master fader too loud while recording the response, or there were other sound effects occurring in the game while the recording happened. While it seems like Portal 2 doesn't account for resonant frequencies, this isn't necessarily true for all video games. There's still way more games out there that can be researched just like this, so feel free to go ahead and try for yourself. And who knows, with virtual reality making games increasingly immersive, maybe this will be an avenue of research and exploration for sound designers in the future.